Mr. President, in a moment here, as my colleagues gather, we hope to be able to pass the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act. I want to first acknowledge all the people who worked so hard on it, our staffs, obviously, and in addition, Senators Cardin, Risch, and Menendez, and over 50 co-sponsors, many of whom will join us here this evening. I also want to thank Leader McConnell and Schumer for their support in helping us get here. I want to thank Chairman Crapo, who has helped us make some important changes at the end that will make the sanctions easier to implement. A lot of people have been watching on the news the protests that are going on in Hong Kong and wondering perhaps the depths of what it's all about. When the United Kingdom handed Hong Kong over to China, they signed an agreement, what's known as the Joint Declaration, and it basically guaranteed a high degree of autonomy and freedom to the people of Hong Kong. As a result of that agreement, the United States has treated commerce and trade with Hong Kong differently than it has commercial and trade activity with the mainland of China. But what's happened over the last few years is the steady effort on the part of Chinese authorities to erode that autonomy and those freedoms. The most recent protests really began with a proposal to pass an extradition law that would allow the Chinese government to basically arrest and have arrested and extradite someone in Hong Kong over to the mainland. And there was a huge pushback against that. And those protests emerged as a result of it. And even after the Hong Kong government pulled out from pursuing that agreement or pursuing that law, the protests have continued because the people of Hong Kong see what's coming. They see the steady effort to erode the autonomy and their freedoms. And the response by the Hong Kong authorities under tremendous pressure from Beijing is violence and repression. So far, over 5,000 people have been arrested in Hong Kong. The youngest was 12 years of age, the oldest 82. Hundreds more have been injured by both violence committed by police authorities, but also by street gangs, criminals, thugs, empowered and encouraged by Chinese authorities. And this effort by China to exert control and remove autonomy continues unabated. Just some examples. There was a law that was passed that banned wearing masks. And a Hong Kong court ruled that that ban was unconstitutional. Well, today, the so-called National People's Congress in Beijing ruled that Hong Kong courts have no authority, no power to review Hong Kong government legislation. Under pressure from Beijing, Hong Kong's government is threatening to cancel the November 24th elections. Elections, by the way, that China's been interfering in. They've pushed to ban critics like Joshua Wong from running. 7 candidates who are running have been attacked by street gangs during this campaign. 2 candidates have been arrested while campaigning. And now, in the latest move, China's pushing the Hong Kong government to pass what they call a new national security law, a law that would allow them to arrest political critics and opponents. And if this passes, if that happens, that's the very definition of control and de facto proof of all loss of autonomy. And by the way, China's also pushing for something very ominous. They call it patriotic education. What China's really pushing for in Hong Kong is moving from one country, 2 systems to one country, 1 system, the Chinese system. And so the bill that we'll bring up here in a moment with tremendous bipartisan support requires 5 quick things that I'll touch on. First, its most important element is it requires the Secretary of State to annually certify whether Hong Kong warrants being treated differently than China. If Hong Kong is no longer autonomous, and that's the rationale for different treatment, then they should no longer receive that treatment. It says that students in Hong Kong shouldn't be barred from entering the United States, getting a visa to study here, for example, because they've been the subject of a politically motivated arrest or detention. It says that for the next 7 years, the Secretary of Commerce is going to report on whether export controls and sanction laws are being enforced by the government of Hong Kong, or whether China is using Hong Kong to evade, as a backdoor to evade export controls and sanctions. It says that if Hong Kong ultimately returns and passes that extradition bill that China wants, the president has to present a plan to protect Americans from this law. And last but not least, it requests that the president identify, or it mandates that the president identify and sanction foreigners. The president determines, based on credible information, foreigners who are responsible for extraditions, for arbitrary detention, for torture, for forced confessions inside of Hong Kong, or any other human rights violations in Hong Kong. And by the way, would also allow blocking their assets of these persons if those assets are located here in the United States. And so in a moment here, as we continue to gather, I know we're awaiting the arrival of a companion legislation. I would yield the floor because I know we have a lot of important sponsors that are here that want to speak on this subject.